At the risk of sounding repetitive, I would find myself initially in a state of awareness view position which is neither fully on the real side and everything creationally multi-dimensional that can potentially be experienced there, or on the physical, where through the physical body vehicle apparatus are we resigned to just the simulated unreality that the densest creational level comprises of, but instead a position which bridges these two options, an in-between state. From such a position, we have simultaneously the experience of the physical level where our physical vehicle happens to be, and certain elements and features from the real side present also within it, as opposed to the environments and scenes these features would have been within were we fully to move our view to the real side. It seems this position I find myself in, and rather frequently of late, is affording me specifically experience pertaining generally to attacks I am receiving, from where everything does in actuality stem from, initially, the real side. In that, whatever the nature of the attack may be, it will feature in some shape and form on the physical level as a bleed over through this in-between state I am operating within when I happen to find myself there. And as I have previously suggested, were I fully on the real side, amidst all else that would be taking place, perhaps such attacks I may have overlooked, but they certainly are more apparent in contrast to the physical level bedroom, as though isolated real side features provided by the guides that they are not overlooked. An attempted interference tactic by the dark forces, and that I have experienced and shared previously, is where they have the ability to relocate the individual from their current consciousness affecting life position and body form to another consciousness, which would effect then a different life position and body form. If successful, the real awareness would now find itself utilizing a completely different created consciousness body type, and however that has been constructed. Realistically, this would make no difference to the real awareness, as it simply uses the newly acquired consciousness of ideas and personal self-attitudes, attributes and inclinations, and the experiences thus effected for its ears recognizing comparisons. In such a situation also, the real awareness, if we are able to stand in the reality of that which we are, from that position we will recognize that our created personal self and consciousness is now different. The personal self alone, in isolation from the real awareness, would not realize such has taken place, as from the creational perspective we are simply now a different consciousness, with all the memories and experiences pertaining to it, and unless a file, an idea, is applied in addition, that we realize this has occurred, so we will be oblivious that we are now operating as a completely different personal self. This occurs with the super soldiers as an example, where they are relocated from their current consciousness to that of another, the new consciousness effecting a different body form and life position where they carry out their assignments before being returned. And if they have a memory of this taking place, depends on if the situations as experienced with the alternate consciousness is made available as either memory files for their primary consciousness, or they are informed this is taking place. As an analogy, if I am playing two separate computer games, with the avatars I am using in each to carry out the various adventures and objectives, from the avatar and experience perspective, nothing of the other game or game character is available to each as information. The program files for each game are absent of anything that pertains to the other game or game character. The overall game player is the real awareness symbolically, and from that position we realize we are switching between games and game characters. But were we isolated as the game characters, disconnected from the real awareness, if for whatever reasons we are switched between games, we will not realize this is taking place. The dark forces then have the ability to do this, and their objective would be to remove targets they consider troublemakers from their current position to very likely a different position, circumstances and a body type less conducive for the generating of that which bothers the dark forces, and very likely in regards to new friends, a consciousness absent of any experiences and memories pertaining to the process of awareness, the ears, references, etc., a cunning means to get them out of the way. Although, as I said, the real awareness will recognize this has taken place, and should this occur, but the intent to recognize the ears be maintained, this shouldn't impact our process of awareness. We are simply dealing with a different body form and personal self, utilizing a different computer game character, as it were. The dark forces may have overlooked this, as they are only aware to a point, and don't recognize the reality of the real awareness in relation to the body forms and consciousness that are merely creations. But the nature of cause and effect creation dictates that every experience can only be generated if agreement is placed that sets it in motion. Absent of the idea cause agreement, then the effected simulation can't follow. As I said, I have experienced this attempted effort before, and only through the real awareness impressions can it be determined as to what is taking place. For how would the personal self recognize such if it hadn't experienced it before until it occurs? And then, as I said, we are simply then another personal self, oblivious of that which we were previously. Evidently, agreements are present where the attempt could be made, but with the recognition of what's taking place established, so can be the case where quite clearly the agreements were determined and released, that this assumption of a new personal self-effort couldn't be accomplished. This was another attempt with this same objective, and I would find myself on the threshold of being relocated. My personal self and consciousness switched for another, as though the real awareness putting the brakes on the process, as it were, allowing the time for the agreement to be released, and as on the previous attempts, prevent it from taking place. Quite clearly, whichever personal self it was intended for me to assume wasn't as conducive for my awareness process as my current one. As I lingered on this threshold in my in-between state, the physical level bedroom changed in ways that were hard to describe, as though becoming less substantial, washed out, and becoming colourless. For a process of assuming a new consciousness, and I would then experience the alternative simulated environment and life position as effected from it. It was as though my current physical experience was trying to give way to the one I would shortly assume, if this effort was allowed to take place, which it wasn't, as the real awareness, with the personal self-agreement to do so, was releasing the agreement which would prevent such from being completed. Almost a tug-of-war, as it were then, but one that ultimately I would win, as it was my intent to retain my current personal self and consciousness, and not some other version that the dark forces had in mind. For even with the real intent maintained, it would be the equivalent of starting a new lifetime with no memories of the awareness process I had previously been on, and the newly acquired personal self would have to be brought up to speed again. As I remained in this threshold, there was but one communication I received from the dark forces that were instigating this effort. They simply referred to this threshold position between two consciousnesses as null space. But the situation was resolved, the effort unsuccessful, and onto the real side fully I would go. I would find myself on assignment, the specifics not very forthcoming, though I was in the company of a female human. After a series of assignments, would we be in a discussion, and we both had the impressions that something was amiss with these assignments. They had a certain dark force sense about them, a certain nefarious bouquet. On previous real side experiences, I have shared how the dark forces actually will set up assignments that are designed to appear as though beneficial, are anything but, and are designed to lure in new friends. For the dark forces know we are constant in our assignment activities on the real side, and much as the guides will present us with assignment opportunity that actually will be awareness and life beneficial, the dark forces versions will not necessarily be the opposite, as this would be rather apparent, and likely then we would withdraw, but that they are as though replicated simulated versions of activities and adventures, created by the dark forces to seem as though we are on guide-afforded assignments. Not even as an effort to waste time, as there is no such thing in reality, but more so that through the fake assignments we take on as created by the dark forces, so we are in agreement with them, and agreement with the dark forces will generate experiences that, although we can objectively utilize also as comparisons for the ears, can be somewhat unsavory. But regardless of how creative the dark forces may be, the quality of their simulated assignments, the real awareness has the overview of every creational idea, a real awareness, a true reality that animates through all consciousness, and any deception of simulation effected from deceptive, ill-intended ideas will be made apparent to the personal self as impressions, a personal self that, if isolated, can only make determinations based on what's literally occurring simulated-wise. Easier to fall, in other words, if the deceptive simulation is convincing. And as I said, I had been seemingly on assignment with this other female, our real awareness impressions suggesting we had taken on what appeared to be guide-provided assignments, but were in reality dark force agreement gleaning and taplining faked versions. For after each of our suspicious assignments, we would be as though manning an intergalactic outpost, each of us positioned in a different creational, multi-dimensional locations. However, these outposts were genuine in that they were designed as a benefit, as though stationed where we each were, we were distributing related references and information to whichever beings and body types resided where our outposts were placed. She and I would be with our own respective group of other aware beings at the outposts, and present also at each outpost would be what impressions revealed was a real guide. And so she and I would inquire of the guides there as to the assignments we were suspicious of as to their authenticity. The guides would inform us that the assignments we had described were indeed assignments they had provided and were taking place, but that she and I had not participated. The conclusion then was that indeed the dark forces had perfectly replicated a simulated mock-up of the exact assignments as a guide provided, including faked and replicated versions of the participants, including guides that had featured. With this determined, no doubt then we would shake off any tapline agreements the dark forces had secured through our being duped into involvement with their creations. For if you agree with a simulated creation, you agree with the idea that effected it. Ultimately, you agree with the consciousness that generated the idea and its overall intentionality. And with the dark force creations then, you are effectively agreeing to being controlled by them, as is their consciousness intent and inclination, regardless of how the surface simulated creation appears. So just a heads up of this potentiality. It always pays to lean to real awareness impressions that even if assignments seem to be beneficial, if we receive a sense that something is amiss, it is best not to dismiss such intuitive or real awareness nudges. As I said, the dark force created assignments designed to replicate exactly the assignments we were supposed to be participating in were very convincing. Everything on the real side, and indeed the physical, is seldomly as it appears on the surface, and we would endeavour to always allow discernment that only the real awareness can provide as we go through our process. In an unrelated scene that followed, I found myself viewing through the consciousness-affected apparatus of another individual, as can be an option, whereas the real awareness is this isness everything reality that is through all consciousness, as it affects into a seemingly individuality of a body form and life position, so the real awareness can afford the personal self the view as though through the eyes of any being in creation. What can happen then is the real awareness can disconnect, and during the experience we think we are the individual we are viewing the experiences through the eyes of, as effectively for that moment we have become a different personal self and experience, and only when we are removed from that disconnected from real awareness view will we recognize this has occurred. As such, I would find myself as a survivor, viewing through the consciousness-affected apparatus of a human man, the experience of an apocalyptic scenario. The setting was determined as being the Earth. Interesting, as of late, new friend Jeremy has revealed the intentions of the dark forces to obliterate the planet with bombs, and as everything is based on agreement, as I was experiencing through the eyes of a survivor the aftermath of success in this dark force endeavour, this then is a potentiality, a possible overall human experience that is present in human consciousness as agreement, and if it becomes so or not depends on the agreement being maintained as the one that is most prominent, or if it is surpassed by another, and then human overall experience be somewhat different, as with all the various potentialities I have shared over the years. For indeed, had the earth been devastated, that although nothing revealed the source of the devastation, bombing was as likely a cause as any other, and impressions suggested that regardless of the method, it had been dark force orchestrated. Most of the Earth population eradicated, but for pockets of survivors, subsisting on what remained, what could be scavenged, and this particular survivor colony that the individual was a part of, the one I was viewing through, were located deep underground, within what appeared to be very possibly the remains of an underground train station. Interestingly, there still was maintained on the Earth a dark force representing military presence. The dark forces may have withdrawn during the global destruction, but in the aftermath they were rounding up the human survivors. For what purpose wasn't revealed, but you can be sure it wouldn't be anything especially delightful for the humans that were secured. The military were generally humans that were serving this purpose, but among them would in fact be reptilians, not bothering to retain a human shape-shifted form either, blatantly revealing themselves in their full reptilian forms, and naturally would be the ones leading the human military units as they scoured what remained of the Earth for survivors, very likely utilizing a technology that facilitated their ability to do this. I was operating through the body vehicle of a survivor, as I said, that afforded me this particular potential overall human scenario experience, and at first the real awareness disconnect was in a place that had me think I was the survivor during the experience. But at a certain point, even though the view afforded was maintained through the eyes of a participant, the real awareness connection was re-established. That I recognized then the survivor wasn't my own personal self, but that of another. And with the impressions now available, so I realized that a Dark Force military group was set to converge on this very group of survivors and their underground lair. Although the survivors wouldn't have realized this themselves, limited to just what was occurring currently as their simulated situation. My impressions were that this particular military unit was led by a female reptilian, but that she actually was right on the verge of stepping up and becoming more aware, though at the moment this real awareness inclination and decision hadn't quite filtered through to a personal self that was still carrying out its routines and inclinations, that of being a reptilian enforcer and dominator of humans. It was as though she needed a nudge from the personal, physical level perspective to spark her awareness process. I was to be that spark, and hence my presence here. That this was not simply an agreement idea view that potentially may become human experience, but that one of the participants was a reptilian involved in the drama, but one that was especially gifted, that were she to step up, she would be very instrumental in what takes place on a vast creational scale. And so, this would be why my real awareness was re-established, that I don't simply experience the played out role as decided through the consciousness of the survivor, but through the survivor I now could communicate with this reptilian, as though deviating from the established movie script of this experience scenario. 4 moments later, the military group would burst in, and leading them would be the reptilian female. The military were completely armor covered. Nothing of the bodies could be discerned, though all were human except for the reptilian. She, however, chose to not wear her armored helmet, and revealed was a head resembling that of a cobra. She would have the frightened survivors and myself rounded up, preparing to relocate them elsewhere. She was still currently in a personal self mode, but then came my opportunity to spark her awareness, as I would address her through the survivor I was in the current position as. She was initially rather aggressive at my audacity of speaking out, and would move to intimidate me personally, revealing her long cobra-like fangs, informing me that they could administer a lethal venom just as the fangs of any venomous snake could. I persisted, however, and as I spoke certain key words, impressions providing me the words that were required. These served as though triggers, as though she had been prepped on the real side in such a way that when certain references came into her physical level immediate experience, these would be the catalyst for her awareness process. And this would indeed be so, a complete switch in her demeanour, as though she instantaneously recognized far more than would take, say, the average human to grasp as they went about their awareness processes. A gifted reptilian, as I said, as though she were making tremendous strides in mere moments. This, of course, would not sit well with the other members of the military group, that although she was their leader, she made it very apparent that she was doing a complete U-turn in regards to her intentions. The other military members would attempt to assail her. She was, however, as equally formidable with her body form as she was gifted with her ability to make very swift awareness process progress. In a dazzling display of martial art ability that would be the envy of Steven Seagal, she put down her assailants, although I must say it was in a very brutal and indeed terminal manner, as she proceeded to kill each of them. She possessed of extreme strength also, able to rip the soldiers to pieces, literally limb from limb, despite the armour they wore, the final outcome resembling the scene now as though of a gruesome mass murder. It must be remembered that all reptilians are telepathic. They operate as a kind of hive mind collective. Consequently, all thoughts entertained by a single individual is known to all. As such, her newly embraced awareness intentions, and indeed her actions here, were known to the other Dark Force reptilians who were overseeing the global situations and human survivor roundups. Of course, then, they were dispatching another military unit to intercept her due to her transgressions. Naturally, they were aware of her formidable physical capabilities and were deploying the kind of soldiers equally capable of dealing with such. I was aware of this taking place and would inform the reptilian female of their impending arrival. Interestingly, she would reveal it wasn't just that they would seek to capture her, that they would eliminate her eventually, but not immediately, for as it transpired, she was pregnant, and the baby she was to produce was an especially powerful being that, according to the influences around it, the environment, the parents, the indoctrination, would dictate how the child would operate in creation, for what purpose it would choose to serve and operate as. The dark forces would, of course, influence the powerful child for their own controlling purposes, and so were content that one of their own was to bear it. But now that the reptilian mother-to-be had turned from them, they would seek to secure her, that they could take her baby, raise it as they desired, so that it still carry out their intended function. And very likely, once she had produced the child, they would eliminate her. And at that moment, into the scene would burst another military unit, their objective to secure the female reptilian and she knew they had the physicality and attributes to nullify and take her. But as I mentioned, she had extreme consciousness-developed capability herself, and as the military soldiers lunged for her, she as though created a portal and would slip through it and beyond their grasp, the portal sealing itself behind her and the military unable to follow or to create similar portals themselves. My view would switch then from that afforded through the eyes of a survivor to a real awareness aside from creation position, where I could follow the reptilian female's progress wherever she was deciding to relocate to. It seemed she had the ability to not only make a portal that allowed access to an alternative position if she so chose, but to traverse through time, as though she had her own personal time machine, although one that was generated from her own will, no technology required. Perhaps she realized that to simply relocate to another area on the apocalyptic Earth would buy her some time, but she would still be hunted, and so she had traversed through time to an era of the Earth prior to the cataclysmic global events that would later occur. In reality, there is no time, there is simply agreement and effected experience. The past are agreements that are no longer current, the future agreements yet to replace those currently effecting a simulation. All are as ideas that can be experienced on the real side, past, present, future so-called, but from a physical level position through a technology or certain consciousness development, as in this reptilian's case, can such a relocation to different idea agreements that effect completely alternate simulator bubbles overall be possible, as though moving from one movie theatre seat to another, as opposed to resigning one's self to a single movie until its conclusion. With herself now established on Earth as it once was, with agreements as they were overall that effected it, or as they are in reality that she had chosen to insert herself into, she would assume a human female form, for she, like many reptilians, have a shape-shifting ability. She was effectively homeless for the duration that I observed her, but determined to produce her child, what would be a very powerful being, but now beyond the clutches of the dark forces, who would intend to mould it into a mindset where it would be as a very effective, creational, controlling tool. Ultimately, she would bear her child. It would appear to be human, and she had the notion of leaving it in the hands of those who would be willing to take care of it and raise it. For despite her traversing through time, she wasn't alone in this ability. She was being tracked, and had afforded herself only so much time to produce her baby, but imperative now that when she was ultimately caught, which she reasoned she may eventually be, she wanted it to be so absent of her child that it wouldn't fall into dark force hands. She could have continued to evade the dark forces with her child, but then this was a pursuit without end, and she considered this not to be a very advantageous situation for her child. After deliberation, she considered all the options. She had an idea to leave the baby with a church or a religious order of some kind. That although all religions are reptilian created and representing, she had seen human movies where this happens, and it seemed to work out, at least in the movies. Ultimately, she would leave her baby with what appeared to be Buddhist monks at a monastery of some kind, for she knew that she was being hunted and tracked. She was, after all, connected, hive mind-wise, with the reptilian collective, but seemed her baby was not, and although the dark forces would be seeking it, the fact that it wasn't as easily trackable then as her would make this a more difficult task for them. She would create another portal and relocate to still another time era of Earth, not wishing to leave a trail that would lead her dark force pursuers to the time period of Earth where she had left her baby. The monks would find the child and raise it as their own. They at least would be teaching it morality and integrity, as was their customs, as opposed to what the dark forces would program into its consciousness. The monks wouldn't realize the powerful nature of the baby, a power that would become more apparent as it grew, but for now the child was safe and beyond the dark forces' reach. The female reptilian would continue to flee across creation, through space and time, with the dark forces following. But her process of awareness had begun, and despite her plight, she was, as I said, especially gifted, her process coming in leaps and bounds, and no doubt the guides have great plans and opportunity for her. And it will be interesting to see what becomes of the powerful child in whatever period of time on Earth it is growing up within. And as for the apocalyptic event, again, it is agreement dependent, and currently exists only as potentiality, physical level wise.
Okay, Kevin, super duper, yes. And so there are many options on the table, and as you experience this and share it and others with their experiences, this is part of the wake up. And just like you're saying, she's running across the galaxies or whatever from the reptilians. Well, that's part of her wake up too. We go through a lot of motion and this and that and all kinds of configurations that help us prompt to wake up and eventually recognize, to see what is. And so this is the cool part. And that recognition provides a position of all, which is so cool. But in the meantime, we go through all these adventures because we're in the personal self and looking to recognize that. And so what you're doing here is great. It's a lot of fun, and people need a lot of help. It's a lot of process to go through, 50, 100 years, whatever, and you get glimpses of it. But at the same time, you've got to go through your process. There's a lot of distraction, and that's part of it too, to recognize the distraction. The distractions are okay because it's all distraction, but yet at the same time, all of creation is beneficial. It's just recognizing how it is, how it all is, how it all fits together, you might say, to where we become all aware. Yes. Cool, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here and showing up. It's great. Thank you.
And so, sing the new you song. It is your connection to the true reality, the all is, that the real you, your real awareness, is a part of. New you.